All right, this is week number 7 of PEEP Cohort 1 Thursday session, and we're welcoming Chris Peterson, who is going to give us all sorts of very cool information about feed and egg anatomy and all of it. Take it away.
All right. Basically, I think I just wanted to start again with flock security, making sure you guys just know the importance of biosecurity. Good habits in the beginning will definitely be fruitful. It's going to reduce transmission for your flock, which will benefit your long-term production. It will benefit your customers, knowing that you're going to have a much more consistent and better product, as well as just your birds and your family. If you have other pets, there can be other communicable diseases. The other thing is you can give the best nutrition, but if your birds are not healthy otherwise, the nutrition will not necessarily do the same job. And that goes to sanitation as well. That's part of your biosecurity plan. Just make sure you're keeping the birds clean. That'll keep them healthy. Make sure that you do minimize as much wildlife interaction as you can. I know that's definitely not an easy thing to do, but the less chance for disease, the better. I imagine the chicks you guys are receiving, they have already probably received vaccines. I didn't ask that last time. Okay, so that's good. But yeah, just make sure you will follow up and go through that. And again, you don't know where your customers have been. You don't know where other wild animals have been. We do have a lower incidence of avian flu here just due to the higher temperatures compared to the mainland, but wild birds can carry disease, and we do have some birds like the golden plovers who come in from the mainland on a yearly basis. So you just don't know what they're going to bring, and just try your best to make sure you watch your flock. That's, I think, the best thing I can say is make sure that you know what's normal, so that when it begins to deviate, you have an idea and a plan to take action with as soon as you can. Get a vet involved, and just make sure that you can take action quickly, because the more of your flock that is impacted, the harder it's going to be on you, both labor-wise and financially. Being sick will negatively affect both production numbers as well as production quality. You don't want to be having a huge incidence of a big problem and finding out way later after the fact. I see a sourdough starter. I hope you guys don't have to visit the vet soon. It probably won't be quite nearly as fun as making sourdough bread though. But yeah, there's a lot of negative little bloody droppings. It's not nearly as fun as sourdough bread. Going into the eggs, I took out this slide. If you guys want to go over it again, I can bring it up after the presentation, but this is basically the anatomy of an egg. You have the yolk, the egg white or albumin. These are the chalazias right here. And that's really made to anchor the yolk in the middle of the egg. There's a germinal disc on the yolk that will be for fertilization. If you are doing egg layers, you probably won't want that to be there. And so you either want to, ideally you want to keep roosters away as much as you can if you're going to be selling the eggs for consumption. You have a membrane around the egg white before you hit to the eggshell, and both of those are semi-permeable. If you wash the egg in hot water and sanitize with a chlorine-based soap, you will remove the cuticle, or the bloom as it's otherwise known, which is a wax coating that goes around the egg when it is laid, and that does decrease permeability. But either way, I think is fine. US standards are to wash and get rid of that, which means you got to sanitize the egg and refrigerate the egg, and that is where the keep the egg under 40 degrees temperature comes from, just to reduce bacterial growth in the egg after you've removed that cuticle. So nutrition does affect the egg quality. It affects the egg color. It affects just about everything. Production. The typical egg has 6 grams of protein, 13 vitamins and minerals. The yolk contains most of the fat, and the egg white or albumin has basically only protein and does about half of the protein of the egg. The egg color is generally affected by xanthophylls, which is a yellow, it can be up to red pigment that is found in a lot of foods. You can change the egg color to other colors as well if you really desire, but I don't think many people will want to eat them. And if you can videotape it, I'll be amused, because I definitely don't want to eat green eggs and ham. Calcium is needed both for the birds and for the eggs, obviously eggshell quality being the main reason. Oyster shell and other large grit calcium would be ideal, especially as the bird ages. And that's just so that it releases slower. And as the egg is forming overnight, you have that release into the eggshell. Sea beets and purple eggs. I will look that up.
She brought that up, and it's a question that she's going to ask you later about turning the eggs colors with beets.
I wouldn't doubt it could happen. I did do a quick Google search, and I found some of the other ingredients that can change them a little bit. So I think I put that in actually. So if beets work, I'd say go for it, try it, and get a good photo. But yeah, so calcium is needed. Internal quality of the egg will go down as the bird ages. Typically, they will hit peak in the mid-20s, maybe early 30s, depending on the lighting and all of that. But that peak production will usually be really good egg quality, and it'll slowly decline as the bird ages. You can keep the bird in consistent production, maybe 85 to 100 and a little extra weeks, depending on nutrition and that bird's quality of production. You can molt the birds later in life to extend it if you want to have that for an economical reason. On the mainland, in the wild, birds will molt due to the day cycle as they lose daylight, but that's not necessarily the case here. We have a very monotone environment, and we don't get nearly the seasons that they need to do that on their own. You can do it with nutrition as well. And so here's that lovely table. If you guys want to take notes or try them out, I'd say go for it. But you can get the pale yolks, which is much preferred in the Northeast New England area. They like pale yellow yolks, greenish black. I don't know anybody I know who likes those. If you want them closer to red, you can add a lot of carrots and tomatoes, red peppers, and hot peppers. Birds don't necessarily, they're not affected by capsaicin, which makes the hot peppers hot. It's not going to cause them problems, but I imagine that's a lot of mixing to get all of those things in there. But typically for general production, corn, alfalfa, marigold, I think are a lot of the ones that are used. Kale is nutritious, so if you want a little bit deeper yolks, you could be doing that in your backyard on your own as a nice additive. It's just what you think is good. And here's a nice yellow yolk with a good, strong vitelline membrane, as you can see by the person pinching the yolk. As the bird ages, that will definitely weaken, and you can break the vitelline membrane just by breaking the egg open. I don't know if that's happened to you guys. The vitelline membrane will also break down as the egg itself ages. And so as it sits there, especially for like mainland yolks, or not yolks, but eggs, you can have that be a little bit more prevalent, especially if they have an older bird, doubling that prevalence. But this is, I think, especially in Hawaii, what people like to see as a good egg. People like to be able to have sunny side up or have tamago kake gohan, where they put the egg on their rice and they don't want it to break until they want it to. That can be affected by nutrition. You have vitamin E. You also have selenium, which can affect that. As I understand, the vitelline membrane is also very important in defense of the yolk for bacterial infections. The yolk is where basically all the nutrients for the fertilized egg can grow into a young chick. It's that extra layer of protection, and if it gets punctured by bacteria, it'll really grow there. So here's some egg abnormalities that you might run across with some prevalence. Checked eggs or rough shells can be prevalent on older eggs. Sorry, I'm trying to move my little camera thing. And it's not really an issue unless you're getting a whole lot of them. Typically, as they get older, this is your sign that you want to be looking at changing your flock out. As it takes about 20-something weeks to get a good layer going again, you're going to want to make sure that you plan that transition. You can't have young chicks coming in when your eggs are poor quality. You're going to run into a rough time there. So really think about your flock transitions, because you want your new young birds to be coming in around the time that you are transitioning your old birds out. Noise and disturbances overnight. I live I grew up near Schofield Barracks. They do a lot of artillery training that can cause issues. Helicopters going over low. There's fireworks. There's different things. If fireworks are seasonal, luckily, with 2 very big nights and the rest maybe a couple stragglers, but be aware that can cause some negative effects on the bird. This is called candling, where you are looking at the egg under a light, with the light usually below the egg in a dark space. This helps you, one, see the interior quality of the egg before you want to go through it. If you are worried about something, you can see thin areas in the egg. You can see these little spots where the egg is less thick. Typically, when you boil eggs, you will see air coming out of those little thin spots. So when people ask you if you are injecting your eggs with something, the answer is no. It's just a thin spot in the egg. You'll get the question. I promise you, one day you can see the egg yolk right here. It's a darker orangey color depending on the egg yolk. If it gets to be looking like a black spot, that can be blood. You can get blood all over in the albumin and the egg will look black. It's something to do in the sense that it will let you have more confidence in your product. It's not necessary if you're selling your product as a grade B egg, or if your farm is under the threshold to really worry about USDA interference. I shouldn't say interference, but regulation. That's a much better word there. And for the most part, all the inspectors are if you show them that you're working with them and you want to do the right thing, they're going to work with you. They don't want to cause you problems. They just want to make sure that the general public has good quality, safe eggs to eat. There will be times that you'll really want to butt heads because you'll get a new inspector that doesn't necessarily know what they're doing, and that is not always the most fun, but the best thing you can do is work with them and try to bring in one of the inspectors that you have a better relationship with at that point in time. Here is a soft eggshell. This is typically, as the birds come into production, you get a little bit more incidence of this. If you start getting this later in production, typically, especially in high incidence rates, that is a cause for concern, and I would contact a vet. This could also be nutrition if you have deficient levels of calcium or vitamin D, which helps calcium absorption. Another thing to note is the legs of the chicken. If they are bright yellow, typically that means that these xanthophyll pigments are not going into the egg, which could denote a problem with production for that bird. If they're absorbing all of that and they're not putting it out in the egg, it could be that they're not laying as much. So if you have one bird that has much more yellow legs than the others, and this will be based on breed. I've dealt primarily with leghorns, W36s that are bred for production, but I imagine it's very similar with the leghorn Rhode Island crosses. But that's just another thing to look at, where when you notice things that are out of the ordinary, it's something to pay attention to, because they can give you a little bit of insight into something else that you might not know of. And that's true on the gut, that's true on coloration, it's true in even the bird size, which I'll get into as we get a little bit further into the feed side of it. But soft-shelled eggs, again, if they start being prevalent later, it's something to worry about. If you're getting a few as the birds are younger, just wait for it to pass. If they don't pass, then they get a lot of them, then call the vet. And double yolk's another thing that's common in newer layers. You'll get a few of them. It's nothing wrong with the egg. It's like a lottery ticket. Most people will be happy. You'll get the odd person that's saying, what's wrong with this? Or your bird's mutated. You'll get questions, but it's very common. Just think of it as twins. Yes, the best analogy I got there. And it's ideally, it's basically twins. Some breeds do have a higher incidence. I do not know in particular which ones are better or worse for this. I've just always known that as the birds go into laying through peak, you get a nice wave of these. This is a very small blood spot, but these are very common, especially in brown eggs. And in brown eggs in particular, candling makes it very hard to find minute blood spots like this one. Typically, if you candle the day after, you will be able to find them, or you break the egg right after, you will find the blood spot. After about 3 days, typically, the blood will actually diffuse into the rest of the egg, and so it won't actually be apparent as it's just mixed in with everything else and more homogeneous. But if somebody asks you, it's normal, it's edible, it's healthy, it's just as the egg is being formed, sometimes you have a little break in a capillary and you get a little bit of blood in there. It's definitely this not a big problem when you have a lot of blood around the yolk, or primarily blood instead of albumin, or mixed in with the albumin. People will be unhappy. And that's just a benefit of candling the egg there. Yes, it can be from stress. That's definitely true. Again, with the fireworks, that you might notice that stress, happy birds. I've noticed in almost all animals, if they're happy, they're stress-free, they're free, they're going to do a lot better, regardless of what they're doing. But definitely in layers, the less stress you can, or the more stress you can remove, the better off their production and their health will be. And it definitely helps. So as far as we'll go,
does the USDA have any standards on these kinds of flaws in the egg?
for blood spots in particular, or just what I've gone through in particular, or like in the past slides?
All of the above.
Okay.
So what's required? I just want to stay.
No, I understand you 100%. For this kind of thing, this isn't a big deal. I would definitely take out all of the high levels of blood. They have a chart, and I can get you that. Typically, a rough shell needs to be segregated. I don't know if I can go back. There we go. So this would be considered a rough shell that needs to be taken out of a grade A egg. You could get, I think the tolerance for grade B is 10%. The tolerance for a grade A egg is 5%. So that means if you have 100 eggs, you could have 5 rough shells in there. Now a check, which is, if they're saying this is check, it's hard, and technically a rough shell is a check, but there's hard checks and I call them soft checks, which is a hard check is if you can see a fracture with your naked eye, and you can definitely tell that's a much lower threshold, take those out. If you know that egg is leaking, that is a throwaway egg and it's considered loss. If it has a lot of blood in it, that's considered loss. If the egg is addled, which is where the yolk or the vitelline membrane maybe didn't form quite all the way, or something happened and the yolk is mixed in with the egg white, that is a lost egg. You take those out. They are not fit for human consumption. Do not sell them. And if you are inspected, they will require you to put them in buckets that say not for human consumption. You can sell these as long as they are properly labeled and the customer knows what they're buying. On these, I actually don't know. I don't get enough of these to really sell. Typically, I've never really had one quite this bad. But my thought there is, when in doubt, don't sell it. If they are likely to be edible, my grandpa would take these home and have them for the family. If the interior quality is good, you don't got a problem there, and it lets you just monitor your egg quality. And I would definitely say eating the eggs on a regular basis is a very good idea, because you have an idea of the flavor, you have an idea of the egg color, and any other things that can pop up, such as roundworms in the eggs. There's other issues, and so it just keeps you always watching your eggs. But there are definitely a lot of regulations there. I know somewhere I have all of the USDA regulations, so I'll forward those to Julius or Annie and get those to you guys so that she can forward them out. Did that answer more of your questions?
I appreciate that. That's good.
Do you have anything that's like I did not address that you think I could?
No, we don't know enough to ask detailed questions, but I just don't want to get in trouble, and I don't want to hurt anyone, get anyone sick. And I want to make sure I know beforehand, if something happens, that I'm doing what I need to do to provide a safe and legal egg.
Yep. Most of these are very rare. The rough shell check eggs are fairly common, maybe 5%. Those, you're probably going to get some every day. I apologize if you guys hear the dog barking in the background. These ones are very rare, at least in my experience. This has no issue. This one, as long as it's not a lot of blood, I would say no issue. And even then, it's fairly rare. When I was at our farm, we would have between 8,000 and 15,000 birds, and we'd get not one a day where you'd have a lot of blood. It really just depends on how many birds you have, and that's where candling does help, because it lets you really monitor those things and have an idea. But if you do save that one it'll make the world of the difference to the customer that doesn't get it. But as far as that goes, if you're selling them grade B, typically it's like a bloody egg is edible. It is just completely not appetizing, depending on how much blood is there. So I'll get you those guidelines so you can read them. But yeah, I do recommend candling just because you don't know what's in your egg until you really look. And getting one customer that has a completely negative experience can be no fun, because they come back and complain. They will tell other people. It might not be your fault by any means, but it is something that I would want to be aware of and make sure that you're getting the best product you can to your customers. This is where, for fertilizing eggs as a layer, you don't want to be doing this, but there's a germinal disc on both of these. You can see it's starting to grow on this one. It'll just look like a pale white dot otherwise. And even this one, it doesn't look like it's done much. If you have roosters in your backyard and they have access to the hens, you might get some fertilized eggs. Typically, as long as you want to minimize that as much as possible. I don't have much experience as far as regulation goes on this one, being as we did separate all the males out, so we would never have that issue. A layered diet will basically chemically castrate a male. It will also cause them to pass away before they would have otherwise, due to all the calcium building up in their body. That is one way you could do it on your own if you just are so inclined. I personally don't recommend it, just because you don't know, that rooster may stop eating the layer diet and go to bugs and whatever else it can because it's not feeling good on the layer diet. I really don't know, but I would definitely try to keep the females away from any males you have in the area, unless you're trying to breed for your own layer stock. But then keep those eggs separated so you know what you got going on. Here's another photo of candling. You can see a hairline crack here. This kind of is borderline. It's really hard to tell in the photo, but this would be a borderline check. If it's a thin spot on the egg, it's not really necessarily check. If it's big enough, I put it in checks, just because somebody might grab it the wrong way and it just breaks on them. Once you start getting to a point where you can tell it's like a much brighter line, I've always put that in checks. If it's cracked and you can just see the light coming through, that's definitely a check. What the inspectors have told me is, typically, if it's a check, yep, take it out. It's a restricted egg at that point. You are limited to selling, I think, 12 flats of restricted eggs to any individual customer on any given day. So that's a lot of eggs. So you probably won't run into that issue, but you can sell them as long as they're not lost eggs. And a rough shell goes into restricted, I think, when more than, I forget if it's 25% or 30% of the egg is rough. You just got to use your best judgment and go that way in separating those eggs out. It's a rough egg, in my opinion, isn't the end of the world as long as the interior quality is there, but it's all about the customers that you are trying to form a relationship and make them want to come to purchase your eggs on a consistent basis. And on that note, gut health is very important. The microbiome in your chicken will make a big difference. If you have a good microbiome, everything's going good, it will mean that your feed, which is how you're delivering nutrition, is doing its job. If you have a sick bird with a bad microbiome, you can be giving them the best feed in the world and it won't make much of a difference, because they are not able to have that feed bioavailable to their system. It'll go through undigested. What does get digested will be spent on the bird's immune system as it tries to get healthy again. So it will definitely affect production and production quality. There are feeds now that will go into that have prebiotics and probiotics built in. You can do prebiotics and probiotics in a different method. There are probiotic liquids that you can use as an additive. There's a lot of different methods you can go this way. Personally, it's just whatever's easiest for you. Typically, I would recommend doing it in the feed, or as a chick, having probiotics built into the watering system so that you can get a very good microbiome going from the very beginning, because you just don't want it to be you're straggling as you go into production, and your peak is there in that beginning of production, and you want it to be as good as you can be. Prebiotics, just in case anybody has a question. Prebiotics are basically fiber and some other stuff that the bacteria will grow and use to grow and reproduce in the gut of any animal, but in the chicken in this case. Typically, different types of bacteria need different environments to survive, and so you want to have prebiotics that support the bacteria that is healthy for the chicken. And probiotics are basically just live bacteria that can then grow in the gut and be that beneficial bacteria that they need to digest all the nutrients that they need for production or in general health. And so here is a kind of complex graph. I apologize. It is showing a lot of different stuff. Let me move this thing again. Sorry. And although you guys can't see, I don't think the Skype thing. So sorry, when I'm clicking around, that's what I'm doing. Here's the body weight of the bird over the initial peaking period. So here you can see this graph is starting at 15 age of week. At about 17 weeks of age, that's when you start getting into the laying phase. Typically, it takes about 15 pounds of feed to get them there, cumulatively as a consumption per bird. So that's what you got there. You can see from this point, there is a pretty good spike of feed consumption, getting close to about a quarter pound of feed per day per bird as a layer, or it's much lower down here. So you account for that. Laying eggs takes a lot of calories. There's a lot of calories in the egg, and you just got to make sure that they're getting the adequate nutrition for that. And here you can see right about 18 weeks, they're going to be laying their first kind of peewee eggs, baby eggs, and it will definitely increase. It'll hit about 90. It depends on the breed, but 95-96% production in a controlled environment, and it will just slowly taper off as you get into 60, 80, 100 weeks, when that production percentage is going to be really, quality and production is going to be your guide as to when you need to look at changing your flock out. You can increase calcium, phosphorus as the bird ages to try to mitigate some of that as far as quality goes, but you definitely want to be making sure that you're not trying to leave the birds in production too long and having eggs just break on your customers as they try to grab them, or all the membranes breaking when they open the egg. There's a lot of difference in quality there, and you just want to make sure that your customers are happy with the egg they're getting. And really, that's a conversation you want to be having with your customers. What you plan to be doing with my egg? If they're going to be baking and you can get them grade B eggs and they don't mind that as much, that is one thing. If they're going to be doing sunny side up for tourists, yeah, it's a whole different thing. And you want to make sure that you know that you're getting an egg that will suit their needs so that they're happy with your product. This is net pounds per case of eggs. And so you can just see they'll start laying smaller eggs, and as it gets later in their production cycle, they will have bigger eggs, and I'll have another slide on that for this one. Any questions on this slide? I know there's a lot of information in this one graph, but if you have any questions here, all right, I will be moving on. Here is that production size over weeks of production. So typically, I think they use 20 weeks. It can vary here, but you'll see small in the beginning, especially before 20 weeks, you're going to get peewees. Smalls will go away very quickly, as will mediums. You figure this is 20 weeks, so 5 months. Here we are a few months later, and there are a lot less mediums. Again, this is in controlled environments based on all of the climate controls that they do. So don't take this as the Bible. This is definitely not going to be everything, but you want to basically see something similar to this, in that you go through the smalls and mediums decently quick. Large will be there through the whole time, and it's going to be a staple. As the birds do get older, you will get extra larges and jumbos towards the end. And you'll find that there's different customers that want different size of eggs. Restaurants, bakers typically want that large egg for the recipes. people using them sunny side up, different things want bigger eggs, usually, at least in Hawaii. I've been told the mainland is more of a medium and large egg market. It just really depends on the customer and knowing what they want. And so that is partly nutrition, but really through the life cycle of the bird. You can tinker a little bit with the feed to change production sizes of the eggs, but you're not going to get jumbos at 28 weeks. You might get one or two, but you're not going to be getting any sizable quantity there. And so I personally would recommend a complete feed. There are a vast amount out there that you can do shopping for. I work for Purina, so I'm more familiar with the Purina products, Leina being our main one, but you want a complete feed, in my opinion, because it provides complete, which is it gives the bird everything it needs for nutritional needs for laying an egg, and it also provides consistent nutrition. If you start adding supplemental scratch, there's no problem with that, but when scratch becomes a large part of the diet, you will lower uniformity of your flock, as the bigger birds might prefer corn, they might prefer something else, and they get a lot more of the caloric quantity of what you're feeding without getting the nutrient quality. So you might get birds getting a lot of energy with lower production quality because they're not getting all the vitamins they need, and you might get smaller birds that are getting the vitamins they need but not the energy they need, so they have good eggs but smaller eggs. That's one thing to think about, and that's why I think having a consistent product that is a complete feed just makes that easy. If you feed 0.25 pounds per day per bird, they're going to get what they need, and you don't really have to think about it. You can lower that to 80-20, 90-10. You will be lowering that nutritional plane, but if you have a reason for doing it, it's workable. As you get more comfortable, you can definitely be doing research and trying different things. But I would say, especially while you're learning the whole process, learning how to take care of the birds, just keep it simple, make it very easy on yourself so that you're not having to worry about nutrition. And in at least all the Purina products for layers, they call it Oyster Strong. We make sure that there's enough calcium in there to have good laying quality. Here's a table that shows raising a chick. I just talked about uniformity. As the bird ages, you want it to be going up, and that just means that there's less difference between the birds. And here's, you can just see the body weight as the bird ages, how much feed per day it should be taking, cumulative feed and water consumption. I wouldn't say to really pay a ton of attention to this, but if you start having an issue where you're worried that some birds are getting really big and others aren't, that's a uniformity issue. You can start looking at this and questioning where are you at if you think you have a problem. Realistically, if you're giving them a complete feed and they're doing okay, you're probably fine here. Just make sure that really what you should be feeding about every day as you're raising, and as they go into laying, it'll jump up. You can have a complete plate of food there. Some people are going to pick what they like to eat out of there, and that means they're not getting all of the nutrients they need, versus if you blend it all up in a smoothie, you're going to get a consistent kind of product for everybody and get that good nutrition. And so typically scratch grains, I know they look good, they're fun to do, they don't have the most calcium or vitamin D, which is needed to absorb the calcium in a better manner. And so you just want to make sure that the bird is getting the nutrition it needs, and the calcium is definitely a big part of that for quality perception for your customers, as usually the eggshell is the first thing that they interact with. Does it look good? Does it break? Are there cracks in it? You can see people going through the egg cartons in supermarkets because they don't like the eggshells of that egg. It's just one of those things, that's the way the world works. I have a secondary slide, sorry, that was put in and I didn't realize I left the duplicate in. And economics of it, if you're doing, and I just grab the price, do the math on your own for any product you're looking at. Make sure that you understand what your costs are, so that you know what you need to price your eggs at. This one for the lay-in of 40-pound crumble, it works out to 17 cents per day per bird. You won't have 100% production. You will also have all of these other costs. Just try to make sure that you are setting yourself up for success and you got your business plan going. I understand you guys have a guaranteed buyer in the beginning, so make use of it, do your best to grow, and Maybe find another smaller niche that you can also attack as you get into it. Sometimes people want a farm that they can visit and just reminds them of childhood. Other people want that strong vitelline membrane, a dark yolk that's going to be awesome on top of their rice. Some people want GMO free. Some people are just going to want the cheapest egg they can get, and more than likely that's going to be a mainland egg, and you probably don't want to be competing for that market. I would just advise you don't try, and find that other niche that you enjoy and that you want to be in. And going into the gut health, this is Flock Raiser is a chick raising product. It is the research that they've done to show prebiotics and probiotics and how that has affected gut health and how that affects the birds growing. And so you can see they have an 18% difference when they started including that in the product, as well as a much lower mortality percent. And so I think as research comes out further on these things, it is definitely something that you want to be watching as you're trying to look at not only your convenience, but your cost overall. And mortality is another cost that I think definitely goes under the radar. If you're feeding an egg or a bird for 6 months and it passes away after only a few eggs, you have that now sunk cost in raising that bird without getting much production out of it. So mortality percentage and the general health of those birds is definitely going to be a long-term goal for your success in having good production at an economical rate. And that's where, sorry, I forgot to give the warning. I want you guys to think about, it's not always the cost per bag, but make sure that you understand cost overall and the benefits of that cost, because you can get the cheapest feed, you can do scratch, only your birds will probably be all right and you will get production, but you got to look at your business as a whole and what do you get by doing more. I can't give you that answer because that's going to be based on your business plan. If you are happy with the way that you want to do it, make sure that you stick to it. It's your business plan. Sorry, I forgot again. We're going into a little bit more not so pleasant section, but make sure that you are watching the fecal matter of your chickens. There are two main types, intestinal droppings and cecal droppings. Intestinal droppings are much more common versus cecal droppings. These ones smell. These are ideal samples of either. I'm not asking you to go and baggy droppings every day, but just watch them and make sure that you are paying attention to any differences. You will probably notice differences throughout the year as it changes. Don't expect them to all look like this, but just make sure that you are watching the changes because they will give you a good kind of window or precursor to maybe other issues that might be popping up later. They are high in moisture. I don't know why I did that. I didn't click. And the moisture is what makes them smell. So if you do compost them and you can get the moisture out, you can usually get the smell not bad pretty quick. And that's just something, but the cecals are definitely more smelly. Cecal droppings 5 to 10 times per day. You want to be looking out for foamy or frothy cecal droppings. That's when you start getting worried. This one looks really good. This is a little more swampy. That's how I've always thought of it. So as they look, you start seeing bubbles, you start seeing it spread out a lot more. And it's not to say it's wrong, but if you notice your average is here and it goes to here, maybe you start worrying. If your average and they're doing okay is here and that's perfectly fine. It's just make sure you understand where your birds are, and when it deviates from the norm, that's when you really want to start looking at it. Here is the intestinal droppings. Again, here's a much more wide variety of them. These are much more prevalent during the day. The color is going to be based on not only the feed, but the digestive properties. So if you have a sick bird, you might find the color turns more yellow if they are not digesting all of the feed. I've noticed it can also be young chicks. If you are giving them more nutrition than they need, it might be yellow. Some people, especially like large producers, might say that's a waste. The other side of that is you're also giving enough production or enough nutrition that bird is going to be healthy because they're getting more than what they need, and the rest is just passing through unused. But it is something to watch, and just like I said, pay attention. Don't go crazy over it, but make sure that If it goes from this to this, that might be some concern. If you see some red spots like this one right here, don't pay too much attention. That is fairly normal. If you start getting a lot of blood, then you do want to get a vet involved. If it's laying on concrete where it's hot, you might notice they look different than in the grass. Also pay attention to the context. But here's some that are much more swampy. This indicates a problem. Look at getting a vet involved if they are just basically diarrhea. And that kind of covers over the gut side of the bird. You just want to make sure that they have a good microbiome in them. You can attack that in a lot of different ways. And that microbiome will be evidenced by the chicken poop. And just do your best to watch and maintain good practices. And when it deviates from what you found is your normal, to start really asking questions as to why or what else you're seeing. So if you do need to go to the vet, you have more than just, hey, I have diarrhea, I have this problem. You can give a little bit more history and help the vet get an answer, because a lot of times it might be a necropsy that they want to do. There's different things there. So the more information you can give the vet, the quicker you can tackle it. Especially this is true with BFDs, as they try to mitigate the use of antibiotics that are used, or I shouldn't say antibiotics, but just drugs that are used for people. They don't want to be doing that. And microbiomes and probiotics, prebiotics are really, I think, where it's going to prevent that as much as possible. Of course, if you do get a disease, you might need to do it just to save your flock. And, that might be where you're at. You don't want to be giving antibiotics all the time and just doing blind guessing, because one, it's probably bad for the environment. You're going to make a lot more disease resistant or antibiotic resistant diseases for the birds and possibly for humans. It's just one of those things that we got to watch. That is the quick rundown of what I wanted to go through. If you guys have any questions, I am happy to go through it. I tried to cut out, I think on Tuesday I had a lot more poop pictures, so I tried to spare you guys some of that. Do you guys have any other questions that I can look at answering for you guys?
Scratch is necessary, right? Like it goes into the gizzard and grinds stuff up for them. That's part of it.
So the gizzard is an organ that will grind up the food that they eat. Like oyster shell will get ground up slowly. So anything they eat, the gizzard is going to grind it down. It's
okay.
Scratch is just a medium of feed. So you have like scratch which would be like loose ingredients. So if you're just grabbing like peas, carrots, sunflower seeds, whatever you can find and just throw it on the ground, that's a scratch. Versus something like a pellet, which it is all of those ingredients to hit the nutritional goals. They grind it up at a mill and basically put it in a uniform product.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
A little bit.
Okay, so I wouldn't say like any part. You could probably make a scratch product that provides ideal nutrition, and if you're making sure that every bird is getting the right amounts of it, you're doing good. The problem is if you have multiple birds, the biggest bird might grab all the corn and the smaller ones are left with what's left, and one's going to get all the energy without as much nutrients, and vice versa on the other side. And that's where I do recommend a complete feed, just because it gives all of the birds a nutrient consistent diet. You can add alfalfa, you can add whatever you want to make it more fun, but I would make sure that the vast majority of the base, especially in the beginning before you want to start tinkering, is a complete diet, so that you're doing what the bird needs, and then you can start venturing off into a little more research.
I use like a corn based mixture as bribery to get them to go where I want them to go. Shake it in the tin thing and sing a little song, and they all come running, and then I can close the door. It's just candy bribe.
No, I'm not saying that's bad at all. I'm just saying there's definitely people that will just like buy some peas, dried corn, make that what they feed the birds.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that will not, the bird will probably live. You're not going to get good production. There's going to be a lot of caveats there.
Okay.
And in backyard poultry, you do have a little bit more leeway in that your birds can go forage. So they might be able to get some of it in your backyard if they're out running around eating bugs, eating different things.
Mhm.
You just can't guarantee that. And then I didn't mention that in today's talk is I know there's a few different things that can change the taste of the egg. I don't know what they are. So if you start noticing somebody saying, hey, your eggs taste bitter for some reason, look if you have a new weed, look if I really don't know that one.
Wow. Okay.
So that was just an anecdotal evidence that we had at one point in time. And
Mhm.
that makes that idea.
That's interesting.
What are the good like prebiotics or whatever, probiotics to put in the water?
So there's, in the Korean natural farming method, there's LAB, which is lactic acid bacteria you can make. And that's typically basically making cheese curds and using the bacteria that made the cheese curds and using that in the water. There is a Japanese company that I think the product name is EM. And Julius, do you remember? I don't remember at this point.
It's called EM1. The only caution I would say with using any of those, unless you have a bubbler or what you call air pump in your water system, that thing will go bad real quick. And if you do use that, I would change the water daily, flush it out, because it will go anaerobic real quick. And yeah, not fun for the birds.
Yep. And on our side, we would have also, it would gum up the pipes, the water pipes. So it required a lot of maintenance, and getting it in the feed that we found was easier, but there are other options out there.
Okay. There's one of the feed stores sells like a powdered probiotic thing that I've been putting in the water like once a week for all the birds, it makes me feel like I'm doing a good job, but I don't know all the science behind it.
Yeah, that there's a lot of science going on there right now. I know Korean as a company is doing a lot of research there, and that's why they're coming out with all of these feeds with it in it.
Mhm.
I don't know the different research as to all the different companies. I don't know which bacteria is the best bacteria to have in there. I imagine that's probably going to be information that's going to be coming out in the next 15 years. Research goes slow. Unfortunately, it's not going to be here real quick, but maybe quicker than 15 years. But I imagine they're already targeting certain bacteria, so I imagine they'll have a much better idea as they start getting more and more data that way. But if it's not hurting and you've been doing it already, I don't think it's preventing. The way I look at it is competitive exclusion is if you're just consistently inoculating the birds with the bacteria, if it's not ideal, you might be doing something, but at the same time, you're still preventing salmonella, you're still preventing E. coli based on the fact that there's bacteria that you don't want in there that you're basically trying to flush out with this bacteria you're consistently putting in there. There might be better ideals of what the microbiome should ideally look like based on the diet of the bird, but I don't know. I know they have a few for the flock raiser and stuff that they've been doing research on, but I personally don't know the research on that.
Now, Julius uses like a mash instead of pellets and feed. Did you choose that? I was wondering if it was because their crop wouldn't have to work so hard. Is that why?
Wait, are you asking me?
Yeah.
No, it's all based on the trials that we did. And the reason being, at least this is my thought process going into that. The less processed feed, I feel like I don't want to say easily digestible, but the less processed the feed go through, the easier for the chickens to eat.
Mm-hmm.
But the caveat with that is the homogeneity, or I don't know if I said that, or uniformity of the feed might get lost, because when you pelletize, and also there's less waste when you pelletize. Obviously, the chick can't peck on something really small, although the crumble is a smaller version of the pelletized feed. It's easily pecked at by a chick, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with the mash form, it's like smaller than a grain of sand on some parts. So there's some waste for sure, something that they can't peck at or eat. But that's the trade-off. It's really just a personal preference or decision based on the trials that we did, and nothing. In fact, I was advised against it, but again, it's just my personal preference. Oh, and also if you are running an auger system, or
Auger.
if you have a big operation and you're running an auger system, a mash feed will clog up your system. The mash won't flow as easily as a pelletized feed. And I know that even with the feeders that we use, if they get compacted in, and the feed won't go down unless you shake the feeder. So we had to modify our feeders for that purpose.
Okay.
I've been there firsthand, Julius. I remember, yeah. At our farm, we had that happen. We tested, and there's different systems handle the mash differently. So, and the mash size will make a difference. So there's definitely a lot more testing that has to go on if you're going to try a mash in an automated feeding system. The pellets are big enough that they're going to flow very easily, but it won't. Yeah, so I've been there, so I definitely agree with you there, and I do agree you're going to have more wastage in a mash product because the birds won't be able to pick all of the ingredients. So you're going to get those smaller particles that are lost. You also will have less uniformity in the nutrition between the birds, just due to the fact that some can grab more of the corn, some might grab more of the vitamins, and at that point you might have bigger birds with weaker shells and then smaller eggs because that one doesn't get the calorie needs it needs to produce a bigger egg. On that flip side, as Julius mentioned, in the pelletizing process, they do heat a lot of the ingredients through pelleting, and that can lower the nutritional quality. They make it so they make it knowing that it's not a huge amount, but it's like cooking. If you ever buy a vitamin pack and they say if you cook this at a certain temperature, you can only cook it once. I don't know if you guys have ever done that. If you cook it the second time, you don't get the same nutritional quality. And so it's that same thing. And they do over fortify the product typically to make sure that when they give you a nutritional analysis on the bag, it's going to have that in there. But as Julius was mentioning, you are cooking the product. I don't want to say cooking per se, but it goes through a heating process as it goes through the pellet. And sorry, Christy, to answer your question, typically if your bird is eating everything you give it and it is still trying to eat more, I would take that as a cue that you could feed it more. They will typically stop eating when they're full. In a commercial setting, they have feed in front of them 24/7, and they will eat what they want to eat and stop otherwise. And so they won't eat themselves to death or anything. But if you've noticed that they're trying to eat your furniture or whatever it is, you think that they need more food, don't hesitate to give them more, because the worst it's going to be is you're feeding another bird in your yard or whatever else gets to it. So I wouldn't be opposed to feeding a little bit more to make sure that you're getting the nutrition to the bird. You just don't want so much extra feed out there that you're attracting all the wild birds and creating a vector for disease for your flock. No problem. Any other questions?
For all of us participants, like my plan to get feed, like we created a budget for us all to have feed for before the birds start laying. So then after they start laying, we'll be selling the eggs that will pay for their feed. So they have this self-determination thing. They get to pay for their own room and board, which is often rare for women. I feel like they have this great opportunity. So what I wanted to do was, like, we can do it two ways. Like, I've been keeping a load of feed at my house that I've been getting from Aaron Bandman. And then when I give you chickens, then I'm going to give you a bag of feed too. And you can continue picking it up from my house if you want to. Or if you should purchase feed, send me the receipt and I'll apply it to your account like that. Like, I've done that with Lon. He's purchased some feed already. So it's like I submitted for him to get direct deposit reimbursed for that. We do have like a up into a point kind of thing. So you might go over, or you'll definitely not go under. I'll keep track of all that. I'm a very bookkeeper type. The longer I keep your chickens, the less feed that you'll get because I'm feeding them. And I was going to raise them for 12 weeks, but now we're approaching 15. I'm taking some of the feed budget for me. But I know that most of us are really close to getting our stuff done, really close to getting our chickens. Super excited about that. They're also ready for their forever homes. It'll be great. But anyway, that's how I was going to run the feed. And I will forward, if I haven't forwarded to everyone, I'll forward you Aaron Bandman's phone number, and then also the other phone numbers of the places around the island that you can buy feed to. I know out on the west side, there's a feed store in Kikaha that might be like easier than getting it from Aaron Bandman up in Kapahi. Aaron lives like an eighth of a mile from you, Lauren. So it's like on the same road. That's what I know about our feed plan. If you have a better plan, like I'm totally open to it. Like I've just made this whole thing up. So I'm open to feedback for it. So cool.